A group of elderly retired Jews gather each morning at United Bakers. I'm updating the joke. They sit and drink their coffee for hours, discussing the state of the world. Their talks are usually quite depressing. One day, one of the group announces excitedly, "You know what? I'm an optimist." The others are shocked, but then one of them notices something fishy and says, "Wait a minute. If you're an optimist, why do you look so worried?" To which he replied, "You think it's easy to be an optimist?" I was reminded of this joke because it's been a very slow news week, if you've been paying attention. And the state of our world, not so easy to be an optimist. Today is day 239. Day 239 since the war began. 239 days in which Israeli hostages and deceased are still in captivity. 238 days since Israel launched its retaliatory response to Hamas's brutal attack. And God knows how many days since the world seems to have lost its moorings. Everything seems upside down. Disinformation, a lack of reasonable analysis, diminishment of meaning of important words like genocide, faux morality, lack of history, no understanding of context, of fact, the diminishment of truth, all seemingly replaced by ideology. The world seems upside down, and I know that for myself and for many of the people that I talk to on a daily basis, it seems paralyzing, overwhelming. How do we respond? Where are the leverage points? It makes us want to run and hide and hope that it all goes away. Which is why, in preparing for this week's Torah reading, there is a comment from the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim, an 18th century Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, who is perhaps best known for his monumental work on Lashon Hara, on evil speech, it's more than gossip. In many ways, I think Lashon Hara and his work really talks about the disinformation, the misinformation, the denial of truth and of fact that is so prevalent in our world today. So it's not surprising that he would write this comment, but the comment really caught my attention. The Tochacha that Miriam chanted so beautifully this morning, the Tochacha, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks calls it the most terrifying passage in all of literature. And so the Chafetz Chaim has a comment on the Tochacha in which he writes, Yeshnam anashim sheyir'im min hatochacha. There are people who fear the Tochacha, the curses. Yotz'im mi beit haKnesset b'shah kriyata. They leave the Beit Knesset, they leave the synagogue when it's time to read it. Or yesh kihilot shekoreh mablia et hamelim v'koreh b'kol namuch. Or they're synagogues that do what we do. We swallow the words. We read them in a hushed tone. To which the Chafetz Chaim rightly points out, V'rov hamitpalalim einam shomim et hakriyah. And therefore, either because you leave the synagogue or we recite it in a hushed tone, most of the people don't actually hear the words. They don't pay attention to it. And he gives an analogy, mashal, lama hadavar domeh. What is this akin to? He says it's akin to someone who is warned not to take a particular route. That route will take you through danger. It's a dangerous route. Don't go that way. But, aval, hala ena shomea ve'enu makshiv lekol mazhirim. But the person doesn't hear and doesn't listen, doesn't pay attention to the warning that was given to him about that route. V'holech dafka b'derech zo, and walks instead specifically along the route for which he was warned not to take. Ela sham kasot al einav leval yirah et hamashkilim vet hachayot haraot, and goes through that route, through the dangerous way, as if they were closing their eyes and trying to ignore all the dangerous animals and other obstacles that would come into their path. Ve'ena ma'aleh al da'ato, and it doesn't occur to this person, ki adaraba, that the opposite is actually true, that you can't ignore the danger signs. Because if you do, akshav hasakana, now there is danger. If you ignore them, od yoter gedola. If you ignore them, they will become even greater. Chafetz Chaim, 18th century. And yet his words ring so loudly and true for us today. You can't ignore trouble. You can't throw up your arms in the air. You can't run and hide and hope that it will get better. It doesn't. It always gets worse. And yet it seems that there's so many in our society today, Jews and non-Jews, leaders, university presidents, and others, that are trying to close their eyes, ignore the danger signs, and find some element of appeasement. And I'm using this word particularly, recalling Chamberlain in the 1930s, that there are just some danger signs you can't appease. Because if you do so, if you think that somehow or other, that some modicum of reasonableness in an unreasonable circumstance is going to somehow solve this problem, we know from history over and over again, even from the 18th century, listening to the Chafetz Chaim, that it doesn't turn out that way. It always gets worse. And just look at what's happened in our own society over the last several months. The longer the campus protests are allowed to fester, the more universities try to negotiate some reasonable solution, try to give an inch to something that is unreasonable about Israel and Zionism and racism and anti-Semitism, the worse it's going to get. The harder it becomes, the more violent, when the universities do decide to finally clear the campuses, they will be. It's a shame that what has previously mostly been the beacons of education have allowed themselves in this conflict to become bastions of ignorance. And you don't take my word for it, right? Like, you ignore the warning signs, you ignore what's happening in the world. We do so at our own peril. The fact that the Ayatollah of Iran this week came out and endorsed the campus protests and all those that are protesting against Israel should be evidence enough for most reasonable, rational people that there's something wrong here. The Ayatollah of Iran is endorsing the campus protests. Just remember what happened in his own country to women who refused to wear a hijab. How many people were killed? How many people were rounded up and put in detention? This is a country that has a morality police. You can't make this up. The Ayatollah announces his endorsement for these campuses' protests. And if that weren't enough, ISIS came out and did it too. Give me 1 second. This is what ISIS tweeted from their general command this week. You just really can't make this stuff up. While we support the assassination of infidel Zionists and the beheading of them, we also appreciate and value the movement of Western demonstrators and sit-in students from the Western universities. If these are your allies, the warning signs should be flashing and ringing loud and true. And the fact that anybody has any modicum of thought that you should continue along this path with allies such as this just goes to show us how absurd and incomprehensible this moment has become. How much longer will those, all of them, the campuses, the labor unions, all of the people that seem to be closing their eyes to the danger signs of anti-Semitism, the equation of Zionism with an anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism, how much longer will people close their eyes to the warning signs before it becomes too late? And unfortunately, I fear that it's going to get worse. And just as you think it gets as worse as it possibly can be, something more happens. This week, on Monday morning, I spent an hour in the rain in front of the Beit Sefer, Beis Chaya Mushkin, the Chabad day school in our community, because Saturday night somebody shot bullets into the school and damaged windows and other things. Shot bullets into school. And it's not the first time it's happened in Toronto or in Montreal. And later in the week, a yeshiva, a day school in Montreal, also, again, was a victim of bullets shot into its building. And I don't remember if it was Thursday or Friday. All the days kind of like come together now. But a fire bombing attempt was made at another school in Vancouver. 3 incidents of violence on Jewish schools. These kids have nothing to do with what's going on in Israel, other than supporting their people and their homeland who are fighting a just war in a just way. It's not a long hop, skip, and a jump from these acts of violence that, thank God, were done at night and when schools weren't filled, to some crazy person feeling inspired to do something more. The danger signs are all around us. And when those in leadership positions respond, after the fact, they say nice things. They say all the things that we want to hear. But until something actually changes, what good are the words? The words are empty. And the haters will continue to be indulged and appeased. When will enough people see the tochacha to respond in a way that once again marginalizes hate and stands up for what I know because I've spoken with many of the politicians and others in leadership positions, what they know to be morally correct and factually accurate. We're living in a very dangerous time. And Dennis Ross, who was the architect of the first Iran sanctions before President Obama replaced him with John Kerry as Secretary of State, Dennis Ross, points out that, Israel has yet again proposed a ceasefire. And that ceasefire logically requires the return of the hostages. And yet, Do you hear the protests demanding that Hamas sign on to that ceasefire? That Hamas release the hostages? Dennis writes, why the international community doesn't focus on the release of the hostages is incomprehensible. It's incomprehensible. I spoke to a member of our congregation who's involved in one of the unions at one of the universities here in Toronto, and she was telling me that one of the things that's now coming up in her union is October 7th denialism. She spoke to one of the leaders of her union about the issue. She says, well, I'm not really sure that October 7th actually happened. We allowed Holocaust denialism to take root. So it actually makes sense that this would be the next one. But it's insane. How can you deny October 7th? Don't take my word for it. Don't take Israel's word for it. Listen to Hamas. They are publicizing it. They took GoPros on their helmets and on their security vests. They took the pictures. We have the evidence, and their repeated statements that they will do it again and again and again if given the opportunity. And yet people have the chutzpah. It's not even chutzpah. I don't even know what the word is. People have, I don't know, the audacity to deny that October 7th happened, which of course means that Israel's response is totally unjust. Because if October 7th didn't happen, then there's no provocation. That Israel is actually doing it because it wants to destroy the Palestinians. Right? That's what the denialism means. And the Holocaust denialism means that Israel has no right to exist because it's really just a colonial enterprise of Europe. It's got nothing to do with the Jewish people in the Holocaust, let alone it's got nothing to do with 3,000 years of praying for Jerusalem in our tradition. Right? These are all warning signs. They are all warning signs. And yet, there's so many people that are walking through the street, walking down that path, with their eyes closed, their ears shut, their mouth covered, the three monkeys, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, as if somehow or other it's going to get better without real leadership. Without real leadership. This is the tochacha. It is a warning that without unequivocal support in word and deed, as the Chafetz Chaim said, Hema gormim ra'a lenafsham od yoter, it will get worse before it gets better. And not just for the Jews. We know this from history. It was Abe Foxman from the ADL who coined the term, the canary in the coal mine. What starts with the Jews historically never ends with the Jews. And that's why what's going on is more than just about Israel and the Palestinians. It's actually also about democracy. And the ability of people to stand up for what's right, even though they will probably lose their job because of where the public and populism is at this moment. And the more you ignore that reality, the more you allow a context by which evil can come from the margins to the center. Take a look what's happening south of the border. A president gets convicted, and political leadership start diminishing the value of the jury. It's a classic playbook. Go back and read Mein Kampf. This is how authoritarians and totalitarians achieve. Read The Atlantic magazine about the new propaganda war. Right? We already know, even in this country, the CSIS is talking about China and Russian influence in our electoral system. Right? There's a lot of evidence that what's going on now are foreign actors that are diminishing our security and our democracies. And we're living in a time of disruption, which means that we're vulnerable to it. And we hope that it'll just go away, but it won't. It's time to stand up and to demand that everyone in our circle, everyone and anyone of reasonable sound mind, speak out and stand firm. Now, the Tochacha is a warning. Our Torah reading and the Chafetz Chaim, perhaps they were prophetic, or perhaps they just understood the nature of human beings, that every so often this cycle repeats itself. But our Torah is also a document of hope and of inspiration. And it's been our commitment to it for thousands of years, which is why we're still here, why we're still reading the same words, and why we can interpret it as the Chafetz Chaim in a way that is relevant to our own existence and experience. And what's true about the warning is also true, I think, about the response. In today's Torah reading, at the end of the Tochacha, we read the following verse. Ani Adonai Elohechem, I am the Lord your God, Asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Misraim, who brought you forth from the land of Egypt, miyot lahem avadim, from the yoke, from the burden of slavery. Ve'eshbor motot uchem, and I broke the yoke that was around your necks. Ve'olech etchem komimiyut, and I walked with you komimiyut, upright, tall, straight. Sforno, an Italian commentator, says that komimiyot is al-hefech. It's the opposite of what we read in the prophet Isaiah. Asher amru l'nafshecha shechai v'na'avura v'tashsimi ke'eretz goch. That as slaves you lie down and others walk upon you. In other words, at the end of the Tochacha, God reminds us that God made us free in order to stand tall, to stand straight, to not be trampled upon, and to not allow ourselves to be trampled upon. We are blessed that we live in a free country. We are blessed that we've been given the opportunity here to be successful in work and in our social lives. We are blessed to live in a country that is ruled by the rule of law and that has elections by which elected officials are responsible and accountable to the people. What it means to be free is to listen to the warning signs, to do everything within our power to make sure those in positions of authority and influence in all our spheres of life, that they listen to the warning signs, that they see it, that they hear it, that they understand it, and that they understand what silence brings. There is a famous song by Safam in the 1970s, which it's a Jewish rock group out of Boston. They were very, very famous in USY circles. And in writing about the Soviet oppression and the importance of standing up and protesting for the Free Soviet Jewry movement, they wrote this verse: "We know what silence brings, another Hitler waiting in the wings." The warning signs are everywhere, and they're overwhelming. And our response must be komimiyot, to stand tall, to use our voices and our influence. And none of this is to say, Like, it seems ridiculous that I have to say this because it's obvious, but we have to say it because our enemies don't understand it. None of this is to say or to diminish the suffering that Palestinians are going through as a result of this war. That suffering is real, and it's a shame. But it's exactly as Golda Meir said so many years ago. I can forgive the Palestinians for killing my children. I can't forgive them for causing me to kill theirs. John Spencer, who is a military researcher, teacher, and thinker at West Point, John Spencer coined a new phrase. It's not that Hamas are using human shields. They're not using their civilians as human shields. No, their strategy is they're using them as human sacrifice. That's the warning sign. It's not that they're shields. They are being sacrificed for Hamas. And it is a shame that this war is happening and so many thousands of innocent people are getting caught up in it. And you know something? It's a shame that Ukrainians are dying too. It's a shame that Eritreans and Ethiopians are dying, that in Myanmar, that there's 1 million Muslims that are constantly going in and out of concentration camps in China. It is a shame that innocent people get caught up in this and die. But to stand tall with Komiyot is to say, I mourn for the loss of Palestinian lives, but the responsibility is on Hamas. Release the hostages, and there's a plan for a ceasefire today. Komiyot. And to stop accepting and acquiescing to and cowering from the tsunami of the lies and the disinformation that are happening. If we do so, we are destined to the tochacha. But when we stand tall with truth and reasonableness and morality and compassion as our allies, then the people of the eternal God will itself be eternal. Shabbat Shalom.